I had both hands on the seat in front of me when the bus started sliding. The road was somewhere under us, but I couldn't see it. Snow covered the windows and blew through the gaps around the doors. The inside of the bus had gone dim and gray. It was afternoon, though it looked more like evening. Oscar was fighting the wheel. "Stay seated," he said. He said it like that was still possible. The bus leaned hard to the right and everybody leaned with it. I heard metal groan under the floor. Something in the back came loose and struck the side of the bus. It sounded like a toolbox, though I never found out what it was. Then I heard Dylan. "1 for the wall, 2 for the wall." His voice was right behind me, deep and flat, the same way he'd said it when I was little and he'd found the broken toys under the stairs. There wasn't any reason for his voice to be on that bus. Dylan had been gone for years by then, but I heard him clear enough. 3 for the wall, 4 for the wall." The bus slid across the road. The tires spun and caught and spun again. Oscar turned the wheel hard, but the front end kept moving toward the guardrail. I knew what was going to happen before it did. The guardrail came through the windshield in a spray of glass and white snow. The bus went over it. For a second we were tilted up on the side of the mountain and then we were rolling down. People yelled. I don't remember what anybody said. I remember the sound of the seats tearing loose. I remember my shoulder hitting the floor. I remember my wrist bending under me and feeling something break in it. The pain came late. The bus rolled again before it got there. When I was a kid, I used to hide things in the crawl space beneath the stairs. It was just a narrow space with a dirt floor and pipes running through the ceiling. There wasn't enough room to stand up, but I could crawl in there. I kept broken cars, cracked plastic soldiers, a wooden puzzle with one piece missing. Whatever Dylan found and decided was no good went under the stairs if I could get to it first. He'd stand in the hallway and count. 1 for the wall, 2 for the wall. That meant the toy was going in the trash. The wall was what he called the place beside the back door where he stacked things before throwing them away. He'd count them as he carried them there. 1 for the wall, 2 for the wall. I never understood why he counted. Maybe it made the work easier. Maybe he liked knowing exactly how many things he was getting rid of. The bus hit the slope below the road and stopped hard enough to throw me against the seat frame. For a while, nobody moved. The engine was still running. It made a rough chugging sound that rose and fell under the wind. There was a smell of fuel and hot rubber. Somewhere close by, somebody was crying. I tried to stand and couldn't. My right wrist was already swelling up. It hung wrong under the sleeve of my coat. I crawled toward the front door. The aisle was full of broken glass and pieces of plastic. One of the overhead panels had fallen down. I put my left hand on the floor and pulled myself forward one arm at a time. Oscar was slumped over the wheel. Blood ran from a cut near his forehead. "Nobody move fast," he said. That was probably good advice. I didn't have much choice anyway. Gail was sitting against the side of the bus with one hand pressed to her shoulder. Douglas was trying to get up near the middle aisle. Tanner was beside him, holding one leg. Avery was wedged between two seats and looking at the snow coming through the broken windows. They were all alive. Douglas was breathing hard. Tanner was telling him to wait. Gail kept saying "all right" in a low voice. Avery had blood on her cheek and was staring at the ceiling like she expected it to come down again. Oscar got the front door open. Snow blew in across the steps. "Out," he said. "We need to get away from the bus." The fuel tank was leaking somewhere underneath us. I could smell it getting stronger. Oscar climbed out first, then turned around and helped Gail down. Douglas and Tanner got Avery loose. I crawled after them with my bad wrist held against my chest. The snow outside came up almost to my knees. The wind pushed at us from the side and made it hard to see more than a few feet. The bus sat below the road at an angle, half buried already. One of the wheels was still turning. I went back for the food. I don't know why that was the first thing I thought of. Maybe because it was in a canvas bag near the rear seats. Maybe because broken things still belong somewhere and leaving the food in that bus felt like leaving everybody with nothing. I pulled the bag free and carried it against my stomach. A plastic container fell out and cracked in the snow. I picked up the pieces and put them inside the bag. "Leave it," Tanner said. "It's still together," I told him. "It isn't." "It'll be fine." Oscar was standing ahead of us, looking through the snow. "Cabin," he said. "There should be a ranger cabin up the slope." I couldn't see one. I could barely see Oscar, but he started moving and the rest of us followed. The wind covered our tracks almost as fast as we made them. I kept the food bag close and gathered whatever else I could carry along the way. A blanket, a crushed metal cup, part of a seat cover. Nobody asked me to bring those things. I brought them because they were there. The cabin was several hundred yards from the wreck, though it felt farther in that snow. It was mostly collapsed. One side of the roof had caved in and the walls leaned outward. There was a dry corner underneath the part that was still standing. Oscar crawled under first. "Get in here," he said. "Stay low." Gail went next, then Avery. Douglas helped Tanner through the opening because of his leg. I pushed the food bag ahead of me and crawled in last. The roof creaked above us. Snow slid down the broken boards and spilled across the floor. The wind couldn't reach that corner as hard as it had outside, but it still came through the gaps. We sat close together because there wasn't room not to. Gail held her shoulder. Oscar wiped the blood from his forehead with his sleeve. Douglas and Tanner leaned against each other. Avery pulled her knees up and watched me set the food bag beside the wall. I put the loose things next to it. The next few hours went by while everybody shifted around the cabin. Snow blew through the holes in the roof and melted on the floor. The floor was just boards and dirt in most places, with a little ice mixed in. I kept moving the food bag and the loose things whenever water started running toward them. A crushed cup, the seat cover, the pieces of the plastic container, a blanket that was damp but still usable. Gail cut a strip from the seat cover and wrapped it around my wrist. She used part of a tent pole for the splint. It was aluminum and bent near one end, but the straight section was long enough. "Hold still, Everett." "I am holding still." "You keep moving your fingers." "I need to know they're still working." "All right, move them once." I moved them once. "Now stop." She fitted the pole along the underside of my wrist and tied it down with the cloth. It hurt when she pulled the knots tight. I didn't say anything because it needed to be tight. A loose splint wouldn't protect anything. When she finished, I checked the cloth where it crossed the pole. Then I checked the food bag. Then I moved the cup farther away from the wettest part of the floor. Gail watched me do it. "You've got one good hand," she said. "Use it on yourself for a minute." "I'm keeping everything dry." "You're bleeding through your sleeve." I looked down. There was blood around the wrist and some dried on my coat. It didn't look like much. "It'll be fine," I said. Gail sighed and went back to checking her shoulder. Oscar had been outside looking at the road. He came back in covered with snow. It had frozen along his eyebrows and the front of his coat. He crouched near the opening and knocked some of it off with his glove. "The highway's buried," he said. "Can't see the pavement anywhere." "How far to a maintained road?" Douglas asked. 40 miles, give or take." Tanner looked at him. "Give or take what?" 40 miles. That was the kind of answer Oscar gave when he didn't want the question asked again. He looked around the cabin at the broken walls and the roof that had fallen in on one side. "No radio," he said. "No cell signal either. I tried both." "Search party should come to the wreck," Gail said. "They should. Doesn't mean they'll get there tonight." Oscar opened the food bag and counted what was left. He moved the crackers out one packet at a time and lined them up on the floor. There weren't many. They looked like the kind of thing you get in a vending machine, except some were crushed and one had gone soft from the snow. "We conserve supplies until somebody reaches the crash site," he said. "No wandering off alone. Nobody takes food without saying so. We keep the fire going and we stay together." Douglas looked toward the opening. "We need water. We've got snow. We need a route to the creek. Not tonight. There's got to be a way down." Tanner rubbed his injured leg and frowned at the crackers. "The creek water will be cleaner." Oscar looked at him. "The creek's frozen. That doesn't mean we can't get to it. It means we use snow." Tanner shook his head. "No, listen. Digging there could give us a route down. The water would be cleaner and we'd know where it is." Douglas turned toward him. "You want to dig through a hillside in a whiteout?" "I want something better than melted snow. Snow is right here. The creek is right here too." They kept going like that for a while. I didn't understand how people could argue over water when neither one had any in front of him. It seemed like they were arguing over who would be right later. I put the loose possessions inside the driest part of the blanket and folded it over them. "I'll keep this organized," I said. "Anything that can still help us should stay dry. Broken things belong somewhere safe until they can be repaired." Nobody answered me. That was all right. They'd heard it. Oscar divided the crackers into portions. He put a few in each pile and counted them twice. Then he wrapped each pile in a scrap of paper torn from an old map he found under the floorboards. "The supply will last only if nobody takes extra." He said it while looking at all of us. I took the packets after he finished and wrapped the paper tighter around them. The paper was thin and already soft at the corners, so I folded each one twice and placed the unopened packets against the rear wall where the floor was dry. Avery was watching me. She hadn't said much since we got inside. She sat with her knees pulled up and kept rubbing the blood from her cheek with the edge of her scarf. "How's your head?" Gail asked. "Fine." "Any dizziness?" "No." Gail held out her hand. Avery took it and let her look at the cut. Outside, the wind got louder. Douglas and Tanner went out anyway to look for the creek. They tied a strip of seat fabric to a branch before they left, but the whiteout swallowed it almost at once. I could see their shapes for a little while. Then I could only see snow. They came back less than an hour later. Douglas was breathing hard. "Couldn't mark the slope." "I told you," Oscar said. Douglas pulled off one glove and slapped snow from it. "Look, we can melt snow, fine, but we're going to need more wood." "There are branches by the wreck," Tanner said. "Then we get them." They went back out together and brought in branches from the trees and pieces of the bus seats. The brothers used the branches to brace the fallen part of the roof. Douglas pushed the thick ones into place while Tanner held them steady and tied them with strips of torn fabric. The roof still leaned, but it stopped moving when the wind hit it. They built the fire from broken seat frames. The plastic smoked at first and made everybody cough, but underneath it was dry wood. Once it caught, the cabin got warm enough that the snow on our coats started dripping. Oscar set the shifts. Douglas and Tanner would take the first one. One brother would stay awake to feed the fire while the other slept. Then they'd switch. After that, Oscar would take a turn, and Gail would wake him if she needed anything. Nobody asked me to stand watch. My wrist was splinted, and I didn't have the strength for it anyway. Douglas cooked the stew in the metal cup after he got it cleaned out. He and Tanner had found what they said was a marmot near the cabin. I didn't ask how they'd caught it. The meat boiled in the water until the whole thing smelled greasy and strong. Avery looked into the cup and pushed it away. "I can't eat that." Douglas stared at her. "You need food." "I can't stomach meat anymore." She said it quietly. Gail gave her a cracker portion instead. Oscar watched to make sure it was the right one. I ate the stew. It was tough, and there wasn't much of it. But it was food. When I finished, I scraped the remaining scraps from the cup and wrapped them in a piece of paper. Then I placed the wrapped stew scraps beside the paper-covered cracker portions against the rear wall. By morning, the fire had burned down to a bed of red coals, and I could barely feel my fingers. The first watch had ended sometime after midnight. Then Douglas and Tanner traded places, and Oscar took the next watch. Gail slept with her shoulder against the wall. Avery slept sitting up with her scarf pulled over her mouth. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard the bus moving outside. It wasn't moving. The snow was moving over it. Gail started humming when the light came up. She did that when she was tired or worried, sometimes both. It was an old hymn I didn't know, just a few notes repeated under her breath while Oscar dealt out cards from a deck somebody had found in the bus. The cards were in bad shape. Most of them were bent, and one had a dark stain across the corner. We used the driest part of the floor as a table. Oscar kept the crackers near his knee while we played. I won the first hand. It wasn't because I was good at cards. I just remembered which ones had already come out. The Queen of Clubs had a crease down the middle. The Nine of Hearts had part of the corner missing. The stained one was the Three of Spades. Once those were gone, it wasn't hard to guess what was left. "Again," Douglas said. "I've got to check these first." I gathered the cards and put them into a stack. A few had started to curl from the damp. I flattened them against my coat one at a time, then wrapped the deck in a strip of paper from the old map. Douglas looked at me. "They're cards. They're still usable. They're bent. They'll be fine." I tied the paper with a thread pulled from the edge of the blanket and put the deck beside the food bundles. The rear wall had gotten more crowded overnight. There were the cracker packets, the wrapped stew scraps, the cracked plastic container, the metal cup, and a few other pieces I'd kept dry. I had labeled some of them so nobody would forget what they were. Avery was watching me. "How'd that get there?" she asked. "The cards?" "No, the pile." She nodded toward the wall. The pile wasn't really a pile anymore. It had started to look more like storage, which was what I wanted. A place for things until we knew what to do with them. "Those are scraps," I said. "I'm saving them for later." "Later for what?" "For when we need them." Avery leaned forward and looked at the wrapped bundles. "Can I see what's inside?" "No." She stopped moving. "Why not?" "Because it'll get wet if we open it." "It's already wet in here." "Not that wet." That wasn't the whole reason. Some things were easier to keep if people didn't handle them. Avery had a habit of picking things up and turning them over in her hands. She'd done it with the cracked container and with the part of the seat cover. She didn't mean anything by it, but meaning well didn't keep an object from breaking. "They don't look like food," she said. "They might be useful." "Useful how?" I folded the map paper around the cards again. Broken things still belong somewhere. She looked at Gail then. Gail was still humming, though she had stopped playing. She was counting the cracker portions Oscar had set out near the fire. The storm came back before we finished the second hand. At first, it was just wind against the broken roof. Then snow started coming through the opening in thick sheets. Oscar went outside to check the slope and came back with white patches covering the front of his coat. "The bus is almost gone," he said. Douglas stood up. "We can get the emergency packs." "The route's filling in." "We know where it is." "You knew where it was an hour ago." Tanner pushed himself up with one hand. He was favoring his injured leg more than he had the night before. Gail reached for him, but he waved her off. "We can still get there," he said. "No, listen," Tanner said when Oscar turned away. "The bus has the first aid box and the emergency food. If the snow covers it completely, we're not getting anything." Oscar stared at him for a moment. "You and Douglas go. Bring back whatever you can carry. Don't stay out there looking for lost gloves." Douglas pulled on his coat. "We weren't planning to. Listen to me. Fuel, blankets, food, in that order. Fuel and blankets, Douglas said. Food, if we find it. Food first, if you see it. They went out together. The wind swallowed them faster than it had the day before. I watched from the opening until I couldn't tell which shape was Douglas and which one was Tanner. Gale kept humming. Oscar sat beside the crackers with his hands resting on his knees. They were gone long enough for the fire to drop again. When they came back, Tanner was carrying a red fuel can, and Douglas had 2 blankets over one shoulder. The blankets were stiff with snow. Neither of them had food. That's it? Oscar asked. That's what we could reach, Douglas said. The emergency box was buried. Everything was buried. Oscar looked at the fuel can. Did you check the side compartment? Couldn't open it. Tanner dropped one of the blankets beside the wall and sat down hard. The bus is under another 3 feet. It hasn't snowed that much, Oscar said. It has where the bus is. Nobody argued with that. Douglas pulled off his gloves and held them near the fire. Tanner's pant leg was dark around the cut on his leg. It had opened again while they were outside. Oscar counted the crackers. There were fewer portions this time. He broke each one down with his fingers and lined the pieces beside each other. The pieces were small enough that I could have swallowed one without chewing. New portions, he said. Douglas looked at the floor. That's not enough for anybody. It's what we have. Give more to Everett. He can't use the hand. Avery said, I'm the one losing weight. Douglas turned toward her. You're not hurt. I'm hungry. So is everybody. Tanner leaned back against the wall. She should get the bigger portion. Douglas looked at him. Why? Because she's smaller. That doesn't make sense. It makes more sense than giving it to Everett because his wrist hurts. My wrist isn't the only thing that's hurt. Didn't say it was. They were both talking louder now. Gale stopped humming. Oscar put the cracker pieces into small piles and counted each one again. 2 pieces for Everett, Douglas said. 2 for Avery. The rest split between the people doing the work. Avery looked at him. What work? Douglas started to answer, but Gale held up her hand. All right, she said. Nobody's making this better. She took the cracker pieces and moved them into 6 piles. Some were a little bigger than the others because the crackers weren't cut evenly. She adjusted them until they looked as close as she could get. Everybody gets the same, she said. Oscar nodded. That works. I looked at my pile. I don't want mine. Gale looked at me. You need to eat. Not if everybody doesn't get the same amount. Everybody does. You gave me the larger piece. Because your hand is broken. It'll be fine. Gale picked up part of her own portion and put it beside mine. Now it's the same. I didn't touch it. Everett, she said. I looked at her. Eat. I ate. She watched until I finished. Then she ate what was left of her own portion, which wasn't much. After that, she cleaned Tanner's leg. The cut was along the outside of his calf. It wasn't deep enough to show bone or anything like that, but it had filled the cloth around it with blood. Gale used a strip from one of the blankets and pressed it against the wound. Hold still, Tanner. I'm holding still. You keep pulling away. It burns. That's because it's dirty. I took the metal cup and went to the fire. Snow had melted into warm water at the bottom. I poured it into the cleaner part of the cup and brought it over. Gale held out her hands. I need to wash first. I poured the water over her fingers. Dirt and blood ran down into the snow beside her boot. She rubbed her hands together and turned them over so I could rinse the backs too. More, she said. I gave her the rest. She cleaned the cut and wrapped it tight. Tanner watched the cloth as she tied it. That should hold, she said. I gathered the bloody strip she'd taken off and wrapped it in paper. The paper had writing on one side, so I used the blank part facing out. Avery watched me write on it. Why are you labeling scraps that belong to people who are still alive? I looked at the strip in my hand. The blood had soaked through near one end. I wrote Tanner's name on the paper and folded it closed. Labels prevent things from being lost. Avery didn't say anything after that. We played cards again when the fire was steady. Gail hummed while she dealt. Oscar took the next fire shift and Douglas argued with Tanner about the creek. Tanner said digging might open a route down. Douglas said the whole slope would come down on top of them. They went over it twice, then a third time in different words. I kept the cards dry and checked the bundles whenever the roof leaked. By afternoon, the bus was completely covered. The slope around it looked smooth, like it had never been there at all. There was no road to see and no way back to the wreck without digging through the storm. That was all right for now. The cabin was still standing. The fire was still burning. We could preserve it as a home until spring if we kept the roof braced and the supplies organized. Nobody answered when I said that. Morning came without much light. The storm had eased up during the night, but the sky was still gray and the snow kept sliding off the broken roof in little heaps. The fire had gone low again. I fed it pieces of the bus seat and watched the flames come back. Oscar said he was going to check the wreck. He pulled on his coat and looked toward the slope. The bus was buried somewhere below us. You couldn't see any part of it anymore, but Oscar said he knew where the front end had gone under. Maybe there's a route down, Douglas said. Maybe, Oscar answered. Tanner was still asleep against the wall with his injured leg stretched out in front of him. Douglas kept looking at him. Gail was checking the bandage. Avery sat near the far wall with her scarf pulled up over her mouth. Oscar picked up the red fuel can. If I find the emergency packs, I'll bring them back, he said. If I don't, I don't. Douglas nodded. Don't go alone. I'm not going far. That was what Oscar said anyway. He went out through the opening with the fuel can in one hand and a length of rope in the other. The rope had been tied to a branch so we could find our way back when the wind was bad. He took it loose and pulled it after him. I watched him until the snow covered him. I'll be back before nightfall, I said. Gail looked over at me. Who said that? Oscar. He didn't say that. He doesn't have to. He knows how long it takes to get down the slope. Gail pressed a clean strip of cloth against Tanner's leg. Everett. He said he was checking the wreck. He went to find a route down. Did he tell you that? He took the rope. That seemed to settle it for me. If Oscar had only been going to the bus, he wouldn't have needed the rope. He was going to find a way down the mountain. Once he found it, he'd get help. That was the practical thing to do. The morning went on and Oscar didn't come back. Douglas wanted to go after him, but he didn't want to leave Tanner alone. Tanner woke up around midday and asked where Oscar was. I told him Oscar was finding the route down. How long ago? Tanner asked. Several hours. Then somebody should go look. He'll be back. Tanner looked at Douglas. Douglas glanced toward the opening. The snow outside was lighter than it had been, but the slope still disappeared a few yards from the cabin. Gail came over and sat beside me near the food. Everett, she said, I need you to help me search. I can't. You can walk. Oscar told me to guard the supplies. He didn't tell you that. He left me here. He left all of us here. I put my good hand on the food bundles. There weren't many left. A few crackers, the dried meat, the scraps I'd kept from the stew, the things nobody had wanted at the time but might need later. If we all go out, then there's nobody to watch this, I said. Oscar said no one takes food without saying so. Gail closed her eyes for a second. She looked tired enough that she might fall asleep sitting up. All right, she said. Then I'll go with Douglas. No, Douglas has to stay with Tanner. I can stay with Tanner, Avery said. Gail turned toward her. I can, Avery said again. I won't let him go outside. Tanner started to object, but Avery looked at him and he stopped. I didn't know if she had enough strength to keep him there. She looked thinner than she had the day before. Her cheeks were hollow and the scarf hung loose around her neck. Gail stood up. "Don't touch the bundles," she told me. "I won't. And don't burn the paper. I know what belongs where." She stared at me for a moment, then pulled on her coat. Douglas went with her to the opening. Before they could leave, Tanner pushed himself up and said he was coming too. "You can't walk that far," Gail said. "I can walk. You can barely stand." "Then I'll stand near the cabin." Douglas shook his head. "You're staying here." Tanner looked at him. "You don't get to decide that." "I do if I'm the one going out." They started arguing about it. Tanner said Douglas would lose the trail. Douglas said Tanner would slow him down. Gail kept saying all right in that low voice she used when people were making things worse. Nobody went anywhere. By afternoon, the argument had changed. Oscar still hadn't returned, and the light had started fading through the gaps in the roof. Douglas blamed Tanner for not going with Oscar. Tanner blamed Douglas for making them waste time at the bus the day before. They went over the same things more than once, which is what people do when they don't know what else to say. Finally, Douglas grabbed his gloves. "Look, I'm going down the drainage cut," he said. "I'm finding Oscar or I'm finding the route he took." Tanner stood up behind him. "Then I'm coming." "No, you're not going alone." Douglas turned around. "You just said I couldn't be trusted." "I said you don't know the slope." "I know the slope." "You know the road. That's different." They both looked at me then. I didn't want either of them to leave, but I also didn't want one brother going after the other and then having to send somebody after both of them. "I'll stay with the food," I said. "Oscar will be back before dark." Douglas gave me a strange look. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." Tanner pulled on his coat. "If we're not back by dark, don't come after us." "I won't need to." That made him pause, but Douglas was already outside. Tanner followed him. The rope went with them. I watched the line drag through the snow until it disappeared down the slope. Gail had gone with them after all. She caught up before they reached the trees. Avery stayed beside the fire with me. Oscar's name didn't come up. She just kept looking toward the opening. They returned before dark. Douglas was alone. His coat was stiff with ice and his gloves were white around the fingers. He fell against the wall when he crawled inside. I helped pull him the rest of the way. "Where's Tanner?" Gail asked. Douglas took off one glove. His fingers were pale and swollen. "He kept going," he said, "following the drainage cut toward the creek." "He went alone?" "He said he'd found the route." Gail knelt in front of Douglas and took his hand. "Hold still." "He'll come back," I said. Douglas looked at me. "Don't know that." "He'll come back after he finds water." Douglas didn't answer. I took his gloves and put them near the fire where they could dry without getting too close to the flames. Then I moved one of the cracker bundles away from the melting snow and checked the door rope. The cabin was quiet except for the fire and Douglas breathing through his teeth. I set out the evening portions, one for me, one for Avery, one for Gail, one for Douglas. Tanner's stayed folded beside the others because he would be back, and he'd need it. The evening went on while we waited for Tanner to come back. The light outside got weaker, and the snow kept moving across the opening. Douglas was gone longer than he should have been. Gail stood near the doorway and looked down the slope. She'd been doing that every few minutes, though there wasn't anything to see anymore. "There's no track," she said. "The wind covered it. It covered all of them. Dolus and Tanner are gathering wood." I said it like that settled everything. They'd gone out for wood before. The brothers knew how to move around in the snow, and they knew where the dead branches were. They'd be back when they had enough to carry. Gail looked at me. "Both of them?" "They're taking turns." Avery was sitting beside the fire with her knees pulled up. Avery had mostly kept quiet since Gail and Douglas went out, though she watched the doorway too. The food was between us in the bundles I'd made. There were only a few crackers left and some dried meat. I didn't count it again because I already knew how much there was. I got the metal cup and put snow in it. There wasn't much snow left that was clean. The roof had dropped dirt and bits of bark into most of the places near the wall. I scraped together what I could and set the cup over the fire. While it melted, I took out the dried meat and cut it into pieces with the little knife. The meat had gotten harder. It was probably because it had dried out. The first pieces had been soft enough, but these pulled apart in strings and stuck to the knife. I cut them smaller and dropped them into the cup. Gail watched me. "Where'd you get that?" I kept looking at the cup. "Outside." "Where outside?" "By the trees." She didn't ask again. That was good. There were things that didn't need explaining when people were hungry. The stew took a while to heat. The fire was burning low and the wood we had left was damp around the edges. I fed it the smaller pieces first and moved the cup closer to the coals. The meat made the water turn gray. It smelled greasy and old, but it was still food. I gave the first portion to Gail. She held the cup in both hands and didn't drink right away. Avery got the next one. There wasn't enough for a third serving. Avery stared down at the cup. "This is tougher." It was frozen. "That doesn't make it tough. It'll be fine." Gail chewed slowly. She didn't look at me while she did it. "You need to tell us where you're finding it." "I told you, outside." "We need to know what we have. We have enough for tonight." "Do we?" I took the cup back when she finished and scraped the little pieces from the bottom. There were some stuck to the side. I loosened them with the knife and put them into a fold of paper. Gail didn't leave her portion beside me like she had before. She kept the cup in her lap and held it there until every drop was gone. Then she handed it back. I wrapped the scraps and wrote food on the paper. The first bundle was against the back wall with the other things. I set this one beside it, folded the corners down and pressed them flat. Avery watched me. "Why are you making another one?" "It's separate." "Separate from what?" "The other food. We just ate it. These are the leftovers. There isn't enough left to save." "There might be." Gail put her empty hands under her arms. She looked cold even though she was sitting close to the fire. Her shoulder had gotten worse and she was favoring it when she moved. I checked the bundle twice. Then I looked at the entrance. "They'll be back soon," I said. Nobody answered. It got dark while we waited. Douglas came in before the fire burned down, though I don't remember seeing him enter. He was sitting in the corner when I looked over. His coat was covered in snow and one of his gloves was missing. I put a piece of wood on the fire and told him he should get closer. "You'll freeze sitting there," I said. He didn't answer. Douglas had always been quiet when he was tired. He'd sit down and let the cold come off him before he started talking again. His fingers were dark at the ends and the skin around his boots looked stiff. I found a blanket and laid it over his legs. "You brought enough wood?" I asked. He looked at me. "Douglas?" His eyes didn't move. I thought maybe he was asleep. Avery had been watching him from across the fire. "Everett." "He needs to rest." "Everett, look at me." I kept feeding the fire. He just came in. "He isn't breathing." I turned toward Douglas. He was sitting the way I'd seen him sit many times before, with his back to the wall and his hands near his knees. There wasn't anything unusual about that. The cabin was cold and people got quiet when they were cold. "He's tired," I said. Avery shook her head. "Douglas is dead." "No." She paused. "He died sometime before you put the blanket on him." "He brought in wood." "Everett, he didn't." "He brought it in. I saw him." "You saw him sitting there?" "Because he was resting." Gail reached for Avery's arm. Don't. Avery looked at her. We have to tell him. I know. I stood up and went to Douglas. The blanket had slipped off one of his legs. I pulled it back over him and tucked the edge under his boot. He's resting after bringing in more wood, I said. He'll go back out when he's warm. Avery got up. I held out my good hand. Don't touch him. Everett, don't touch that blanket. She stopped. Gail said something to her, but I wasn't listening. Douglas had gone out to get wood, and Tanner was still outside with him. They were taking shifts. One of them would come back through the opening soon enough. The fire dropped again. I put another piece on it. After a while, Gail and Avery went outside. They said they were looking for Tanner. I told them not to go far. The storm had covered the tracks, but that didn't mean the brothers were lost. They knew the drainage cut. They knew where the trees were. They returned carrying a blanket between them. Avery was crying. She tried to set it down near the wall, but I took it from her. Tanner's outside, I said. He fell below the cut, Gail said. He's gathering wood. We found him. He'll be back. Avery reached toward the blanket. I moved between her and Douglas. The corner of his blanket was still on the floor where I had left it. Douglas needed it more than Tanner did because Douglas was inside and Tanner was still working. Don't, I said. Avery stopped. I went to the fire and picked up the blanket. Douglas had curled toward the wall while we were gone. At least that's what it looked like. I pulled the blanket over his shoulders and tucked it around him so the cold couldn't get in. Avery took one step closer. I held her back with my arm. Then I folded the blanket around the place where Douglas was sleeping and kept Avery away from it. The fire had gone out while I was keeping Avery away from Douglas. The cabin was colder than it had been the night before. Snow had come through the roof and covered some of the floor, and the blanket around Douglas had frozen stiff. I put another piece of wood on the coals and waited for it to catch. Avery was sitting with her legs drawn up beside the wall. She hadn't slept much. Every time she started to close her eyes, she looked over at me. Gail needs help, she said. Gail's resting. She can't get up. She's tired. Avery turned her head toward the corner. Gail was sitting there with her back against the boards and her head leaned to one side. She'd been humming earlier. It was the same hymn she used to hum when things got bad, just a few notes over and over. Now she wasn't humming. Everett, Avery said. Gail is dead. No, she isn't. She's been dead since last night. I put more wood on the fire. The flames came up around it and showed the corner for a second. Gail looked just as she always did when she was resting. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were closed. She's humming, I said. Avery stared at me. The hymn stopped hours ago. It's quiet. You can't hear it from there. There's nothing to hear. I didn't get angry. Avery had been frightened for a long time, and fear makes people say things that aren't true. It confuses them, makes them forget what they saw. Gail was only resting. She'd get up when the fire was warmer. I found a piece of paper by the back wall and wrapped it around another bundle. The paper was soft from the damp and had a dark mark across one side. I folded it twice and wrote Marion on the outside. Avery watched me do it. What's Marion? She asked. Someone's belongings. Whose? I don't know yet. You don't know who Marion is? It'll be fine. I'm keeping everything together until the rescuers get here. There aren't any rescuers. They'll be here. She looked at the wall behind me. The bundles were lined up as neatly as I could keep them. Some were tied with thread. Some were held closed with strips of cloth. I had written names and other labels on most of them, though the ink had run on a few. Avery pulled her food closer. Don't touch that bundle, I said. I have it organized. I'm not touching it. She settled with her back to the wall and kept the food in her lap. That was how she started sleeping after that. She put herself where I couldn't reach the food or the bundles without waking her. It wasn't a very comfortable place, but comfort wasn't much use anymore. When the light came up, we played cards. Oscar sat by the fire with the crackers by his knee. Douglas was beside him. Tanner kept stretching his injured leg out and pulling it back in. Gail dealt the cards while she hummed, though I couldn't hear the hymn very well. Avery sat across from me and held her cards without looking at them. "You should play," I said. "I don't want to. It'll help pass the time." "I know. Oscar's already dealing." Oscar looked over. Again. "See," I said. "Everybody's ready." Avery picked up her cards. She played badly, but nobody said anything about it. Douglas laughed when Tanner put down the wrong card. Gail smiled at him. It was good to have everyone together again. After the game, I heated the stew. There wasn't much left. The water had gone thick, and the meat had settled at the bottom of the cup. I scraped it loose with the knife and stirred it until it looked even. It smelled better once it was hot. I gave Avery the first serving. She pushed it away. "What's wrong with it?" "I can't eat that." "You need to." "I cannot eat any more of the people you have been cutting up and preserving." I looked at the cup. "It's not people." "Everett." "It's from a trapped animal." "There was no animal." "There was. You just don't remember." She shook her head. "Hunger confuses you," I said. "That's all. It makes things seem different than they are." "I know what it is. It'll be fine." "No, it won't." She kept her hands in her lap. I took the cup back and scraped the little pieces from the bottom. There was enough for her if she changed her mind. I didn't want it to get cold. Oscar called from beside the fire. "Nobody takes extra." "I didn't give her extra." "I know." He went back to watching the pot. Douglas was saying something to Tanner about the wood. Gail started humming again, low and steady. Avery covered her ears. "You don't have to listen," I said. "There isn't any humming." I turned to the corner. Gail had stopped. The cabin had gone quiet except for the fire. She just paused. "She's dead." I put the cup beside the bundles. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." The day went on like that. Avery would tell me one thing, and I would explain why she was mistaken. Sometimes she asked me questions. Sometimes she just watched me move things around. I checked the food, kept the fire going, and made sure nobody took the wrong bundle. By night, she was sitting close to me. The storm had gotten louder again. Snow blew through the opening and gathered along the inside wall. I fed the last dry pieces into the fire and pulled my coat tight around my shoulders. Avery reached for the hand that wasn't hurt. I pulled away. "What are you doing?" "Trying to keep you here." "I am here. Everett, listen to me." "I am listening." She put her hand on my uninjured wrist. Her fingers were cold. She didn't grip hard, but she didn't let go either. "Oscar died first," she said. I looked at the fire. Then Douglas, then Tanner. Gail was last. "They're outside." "They aren't. They went to get wood." "Everett, they've been dead for weeks." I looked over at the bundles. The paper around them had started to loosen. A little water was running out from underneath one of the larger ones and pooling in the dirt. Avery followed my eyes. "The bundles contain what remains of them," she said. I didn't say anything. "I know you don't want to hear that, but it's what happened. Their belongings. Some of them are." I picked up the Marion bundle and pressed the wet paper flat. Something moved under the fold. Small white pieces worked through the seam and dropped onto the floor. Avery looked away. "They'll be back before dark," I said. "It's dark now. They're outside gathering wood. There's nobody else here." I listened. The wind moved over the roof. Somewhere near the back wall, water dripped at a steady pace. I thought I heard Douglas laughing. Avery's hand stayed on my wrist. "You're the only person still alive in this cabin," she said. I looked at her. "You must be mistaken." She started crying then, not loudly. Avery didn't make much noise when she cried. She just looked down at our hands and let the tears fall. I wasn't angry with her. She was cold and hungry and confused. That was why she kept saying these things. "The others are outside," I told her. "They'll be back when they have enough wood." Avery wiped her face with her sleeve. "I know you believe that. They'll be back." She didn't answer. The fire burned lower. I fed another piece to the fire, and Avery moved closer until her shoulder touched mine. She said she was going to stay beside me until daylight. That was all right. It was safer that way. If she went outside alone, she might get lost, and if she slept across the cabin, she might knock over one of the bundles. I told her she could stay where she was. She kept her hand on my uninjured wrist through the night after telling me the cabin contained only the two of us. Avery held onto my wrist through the night after telling me the cabin contained only the two of us. By morning, she was still there. Her hand had gone cold and her fingers didn't move when I touched them. I added another piece of wood to the fire and told her the rescuers would be here before the snow buried the trees. She didn't answer. That wasn't unusual. Avery had been quiet since the storm got worse. Sometimes she'd sit beside me and stare at the wall. Sometimes she'd close her eyes and move her lips without making any sound. I figured she was praying or talking to herself. People do that when they're scared. The fire didn't last much longer. I kept it going with small pieces from the damaged roof and the wood Douglas had brought in. Only enough remained for one more day if I used it carefully. Avery stayed beside me. For the next several days, I talked to her while I sorted the bundles and counted what food we had. She didn't eat. I tried giving her the stew, but she turned her face away from it. I told her it was only dried meat and water. I told her she needed to keep her strength up until the rescuers arrived. She wouldn't listen. "Just a little," I said. "It'll be fine." She kept her eyes closed. I left the cup by her knee and waited. Sometimes waiting helped. If you left food near somebody long enough, they'd usually take it. That was how it worked with animals. They'd pretend they weren't hungry until you looked away. Avery didn't take it. The cabin got colder after the fire died. Snow came in through the roof and settled over the floorboards. I pulled the blanket over Avery and tucked it under her legs. She was still sitting beside me, but she looked farther away than she had before. I played cards with her anyway. I dealt out 2 hands and kept hers in front of her. Gail joined us after a while. She sat by the fire, humming the hymn she'd used when things got bad. Oscar watched the food, while Douglas argued with Tanner about the rules. It felt good with all of them there. Avery didn't play much. She just held her cards and looked at me. "They'll be here soon," I told her. She nodded. "Before the trees disappear." She nodded again. That was the last time she answered me. The days kept going after that. I knew it was days because daylight appeared and disappeared more than once. I stopped counting after the food was gone. The cabin was buried almost to the roof, and the snow around the opening had turned hard enough that I had to kick through it when I went outside. I didn't go far. There wasn't any reason to. The others were inside and the rescuers were coming. Avery remained beside me during the card games. Sometimes she stood behind my shoulder and watched. Sometimes she sat across from me with her hands folded in her lap. I asked her if she wanted to deal, and she said no. "You'll have to learn," I told her. "The others won't always be here to do it." She turned her eyes to the corner where Gail was sitting. "I know," she said. The cabin was quiet after that. 5 months passed before the morning turned clear. I don't know exactly how long 5 months is when you're inside a buried cabin. The light changes, but the days don't look much different. Snow covers the roof. Snow covers the trees. Then the snow gets blue in the shadows and white where the sun touches it. That morning the sky was clear and hard blue. I could see it through the opening where the roof had fallen in. The air smelled different too. Colder maybe, but cleaner. The trees stood along the ridge with snow packed around their trunks. I was sitting beside Avery and holding the cards when I heard something far off. At first I thought it was the wind. Then it came again, a low mechanical sound moving across the ridge. Henry was riding a snowmobile along the high ground above the cabin. He saw the smoke coming up through the trees and stopped to look at it. The smoke was thin, but it was there. I knew it was ours because I had just put the last dry scrap on the fire. Henry lifted a radio to his mouth and gave the location to the rescue team. I couldn't hear what he said. The wind carried most of it away, but I knew he was telling them where we were. The rescuers came down through the snow with him. There were 2 of them at first. Henry walked ahead and Leon followed behind. They wore dark coats and heavy boots and moved slowly where the snow was deep. I watched them get closer through the opening. "Gail," I said. "They're here." Gail got to her feet by the wall. Douglas laughed. Oscar picked up the food bag. Tanner leaned on his good leg and waved. Avery got up beside my shoulder. The cabin felt warmer all at once. Henry called out from outside. "Call out before we enter." "We're in here," I said. I stood up. My legs were weak from sitting so long, but Avery put her hand against my back. Gail was already moving toward the door. She was still hurt, but she could walk when she needed to. "Hold on," I told them. "Treat the injured first." Leon called from outside. "Can you hear me?" "Yes." "We're coming in." "Treat Gail first," I said. "Her shoulder is bad. Tanner's leg, too." Nobody answered me. Henry pushed the snow away from the entrance. Leon came in behind him. They had to turn sideways to get through the narrow opening. Snow fell off their coats onto the floor and started melting right away. They walked past Gail. She was standing right there. I could see her as plain as I could see the fire. Leon stepped through the place where she stood and didn't even look at her. Henry did the same thing with Douglas. "Wait," I said. They kept moving. Oscar was by the back wall with the food bag beside his knee. Tanner stood beside him. Avery was still touching my shoulder. The rescuers walked through all of them like they weren't there. "Don't do that," I said. "They're injured." Leon looked at me. "Everett, are you hurt?" "My hand." "Anything else?" "Not me. Them." Henry glanced around the cabin. "Where are the other people?" "They're right here." I pointed at Gail. She had sat down again and was holding her shoulder. I pointed at Douglas, who was laughing with Tanner by the flames. Oscar was watching the food. Avery stood so close that I could feel her coat against mine. "They're all here," I said. "You need to help them first." Leon took another step into the cabin. The heat from the men and the open entrance started thawing the snow along the walls. Water ran across the floor in thin lines. The bundles along the back wall began to leak. A dark liquid came out from under one of them. Then small pale things moved through the wet paper and dropped into the dirt. I saw them crawling over each other. They looked like grains of rice at first, but they moved too quickly for rice. I backed away. "No," I said. Avery turned to look at the bundles. Her face had gone pale. Leon was saying something to Henry, but I couldn't make out the words. The cabin kept getting warmer. Snow slid from the roof and water dripped from the boards. Gail's face blurred at the edges. Douglas stopped laughing. Oscar's coat faded into the wall behind him. I reached for Avery and caught only the sleeve of my own coat. "Don't go," I said. She was still beside me. I knew she was. I could see her shoulder, then her hand, then only a shape where she had been standing. The bundles sagged against the wall at the back. More water ran out from under them. "They're here," I told Leon. "They're right there." Leon didn't look at the people I was pointing to. He looked at the bundles. "Everett, step back," he said. "They're right there. Step back from the wall." Henry came around behind me. I tried to move away, but my legs didn't do what I wanted. They were weak from sitting, and my injured hand was still held close to my chest. Henry caught me under the arm, and Leon took hold of my other side. "Don't leave them," I said. "We're not leaving you," Henry said. "I don't need to go. They need help." Henry pulled me through the doorway. I held onto the door frame with the hand that wasn't hurt. The wood was wet and cold. It broke under my fingers and came away in a piece. "They're injured," I said. "Gail's shoulder, Tanner's leg. Douglas has frostbite. Oscar was keeping the food." "All right," Henry said. "Keep moving." The snow around the cabin had gone hard. It took both of them to get me through the opening. My boots caught on the packed edge, and I fell forward into Henry's jacket. He steadied me and led me downhill. I looked back while we were going. Avery was standing in the doorway. Her scarf was pulled up over her mouth, and her hair was blowing across her face. Gail was behind her. Douglas stood by the fire with Tanner. Oscar was near the food bag. They didn't come after me. "Wait," I said. "Avery's still inside." Leon was behind us. He stopped and looked back at the cabin. "There's nobody else moving in there," he said. "They're waiting." "Everett, they'll get cold." Henry kept his arm around me. The snow was deeper away from the cabin, and every step went down farther than I expected. I tried to turn back, but Henry held me straight. "Stay on my track," he said. "The snow's deeper to the east." I couldn't figure out why he was talking like that. I knew where the cabin was. I knew where the trees were. I'd been there for 5 months. It hadn't been 5 months for Avery. She'd said the others had been dead for weeks. She'd said she was the last one. I knew that wasn't true because she'd been beside me through the nights, and she'd played cards with us. But then I thought about her hand on my wrist. It had been cold. She hadn't moved it when I touched her fingers. Maybe she'd already been dead then. I didn't like that idea. It made the cabin harder to organize. The rescue truck was parked below the ridge. Its rear doors were open, and warm air came out of them. There was a bench along one wall and a metal floor covered with ridged rubber. Henry got me inside and helped me sit down. The heat hurt my face. I had gotten used to the cold. When warmth comes back too fast, it feels like being burned. My fingers started aching. My feet hurt worse. Henry wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and closed the door most of the way. Leon climbed in after him. "Stay here. I need to go back." "You can't. They're in there." Leon looked at Henry. Henry nodded and climbed into the front of the truck. The engine started. The whole compartment shook a little. I heard the tires grind over the snow. "They'll be back before dark," I said. Leon sat across from me. He had a black bag beside his boots and snow on his shoulders. His face looked tired, not confused like Avery had looked, just tired. "Everett," he said, "I need to show you something." "I know where they are." "Look at me." I looked at him. "There's one bedroll in the cabin." "There are more than one." "One bedroll," he said. "One usable set of tracks leading away from the cabin and back to it. The others stayed inside. We checked the snow around the whole cabin. They went out when the wind was blowing. The wind didn't cover their tracks." I didn't say anything. The truck went over a rough place and my shoulder struck the wall. Leon reached for the black bag and pulled one of the bundles out. It was wrapped in cloth that had gone stiff and dark. A strip of cracker box was tied around the middle. The writing on it was faded, but I could still see the letters. Gus. "I don't know who Gus is," I said. Leon untied the cloth. There was a skull inside. It was smaller than I expected. The bone had gone yellow in places and dark in others. One side was split open. A long bone lay beside it with a crack running through the middle. There was a strip of dried flesh caught in the cloth under the bone. I leaned back into the truck's side. That's not one of them. Leon didn't answer. It came from an animal. Maybe a deer. There were animals outside. He put the skull back down and opened another bundle. The paper around it had been held with a piece of thread. The strip on that one said Leo, then Thomas, then Marion, then Wren. 5 bundles. Each one had bones inside. Some had dried pieces of flesh. The cloth smelled like the cabin had smelled when I heated the stew. Greasy and old. I looked at the strips of cracker box and tried to remember when I'd written the names. I kept them separate, I said. Leon tied one of the bundles closed. Why? Broken things still belong somewhere. He looked at me for a long time. I knew what he was thinking. He thought the bundles were food. They weren't. They were what was left after food had been used. That was different. I had preserved what I could and kept it dry. I had marked each piece so nobody would lose track of it. It's not what you think, I said. I haven't told you what I think. You don't have to. The truck slowed as it started down the mountain. Henry called something from the front, but I couldn't make out the words. Leon waited until the truck was moving smoothly again. There was one person in that cabin, he said. One bedroll, one set of prints in the snow. I told you there were 6 of us. You were the only living person there. Gail was alive. Everett, Gail was dead. She was humming. She wasn't. I looked at the bundles. The Marion bundle had a dark stain across the cloth. Water had gotten into it before Leon picked it up. I could still see the little pale pieces moving through the wet paper. Avery had said the bundles contained what remained of them. She'd said Oscar died first, then Douglas, then Tanner. Gail was last, then Avery. I told her she was mistaken so she wouldn't get scared. But Oscar had been keeping an eye on the food. Douglas had stopped bringing wood. Tanner had stopped coming back from the creek. Gail had stopped humming. Avery had died several days before she spoke to me about the cabin. That was why she wouldn't eat. I pressed my uninjured hand against my mouth. Leon watched me but stayed quiet. He didn't need to. The order was there in my head now and it wouldn't move. Oscar first. Douglas, Tanner, Gail, Avery. I had eaten what they left behind because there wasn't anything else. I had wrapped the pieces I couldn't eat and marked them with names that weren't theirs. Maybe I hadn't known the names anymore. Maybe I had known and changed them. The labels didn't matter as much as keeping each bundle closed. I was the only survivor, I said. Leon nodded once. Yes. I kept them here until they could be taken down. You couldn't take them down. The snow was too deep. Everett. I was going to do it when the rescuers came. Leon leaned forward and took the bundle marked Wren from the floor. He set it with the others near the rear door. Henry had left the truck's back compartment clear for them. The bundles shifted when the truck turned and Leon caught them before they fell. I looked at the cloth and the cracker box strips. Can they still be taken down? I asked. The 5 of them? Leon didn't answer right away. He glanced at the bundles on the floor, then at me. Stay here, he said. I am here. He picked up the radio from beside his leg. It was a black handheld thing with a short antenna and a cord running down to the truck's console. The light on it blinked when he pressed the button. Dispatch, this is Leon. Come back. Static filled the compartment. The truck was still moving down the mountain and the tires kept grinding over packed snow. Leon pressed the button again. I have one living survivor from the ranger cabin. Male, adult. Name is Everett. He needs psychiatric transport. I didn't like that. I don't need a transport, I said. I need them brought down. Leon held up one finger without looking at me. It wasn't a command exactly. more like he needed me to wait until he finished. The radio crackled.
"Copy that,"
A voice said.
"Go ahead with the rest."
Leon looked toward the bundles. Henry had stacked them near the rear doors. They shifted every time the truck turned. The cloth around them was dark and stiff, and the labels had been tied on with pieces of string.
5 sets of human remains,
Leon said.
all cataloged and stored by the survivor in labeled bundles. Recovery site is a collapsed Forest Service cabin on the ridge.
The voice on the radio went quiet for a moment. I knew what Leon had said was wrong. The bundles weren't people. They were people reduced to remains. There was a difference, even if the difference got smaller after a while. "They're going to be cold," I said. "You have to take them down before the snow comes back." Leon kept the radio near his mouth.
"Confirming 5 sets?"
The voice asked.
5,
Leon said.
all accounted for. Leon, that makes 3 solo survivors recovered from that ridge in 6 years.
He looked at me then. The voice continued.
Same general pattern. Survivors kept the dead in the cabin and stored the remains in labeled bundles. Flag the case as a repeat pattern.
I didn't know what that meant. A pattern was something you made with pieces that belonged together. I had made plenty of those. Cards, food portions, the bundles. Anything could be organized if you took your time. Leon pressed the button.
"Copy. Flagging repeat pattern."
He lowered the radio and pulled a small notebook from the pocket of his coat. The pages were damp around the edges. He wrote with a short pencil and kept the notebook braced against his knee while the truck went over another rough patch. "Don't write it like that," I said. "Like what?" "Like I put them there." "You did." "I kept them safe." Leon wrote something else. He didn't argue with me. That made it worse than if he had. Henry called back from the front. "How many bundles?"
5.
Leon said. "All right." Leon closed the notebook and turned toward him. "Henry, secure the labeled bundles for transport. Keep them upright and separate. Don't stack anything on top." Henry glanced at us in the mirror. "Got it." He pulled the truck over near the bottom of the ridge. The engine kept running. Cold air came in through the front when he opened the door, but the back stayed warm enough that the windows had started to fog. Henry climbed out and opened the rear doors. The snow outside was blue in the late light. He put on his gloves and began moving the bundles one at a time. I watched him take Oscar's bundle first. "That's not Oscar," I said. Henry didn't answer. "That one says Wren." He checked the strip of cracker box tied around it. "This one?" "Yes." "All right." He carried it out and set it somewhere near the front of the truck. Then he came back for the next one. The labels had seemed important when I wrote them. I wanted everything to stay separate. I wanted the pieces to remain with the right person until somebody came to collect them. But the names on the bundles weren't the names of the people I knew. Gus, Leo, Thomas, Marion, Wren. Avery had known that. She'd tried to tell me. I put my hand against the warm metal wall. It was smooth and shook a little with the engine. My fingers hurt where they had started thawing. The pain was sharp at first, and then it moved deeper into my hand. "They'll come down with us, won't they?" I asked. Leon sat opposite me with the radio on his thigh. "The remains will be transported." "Before the snow?" "We'll secure them now." "Before the next snowfall buries the trees?" "We're not leaving them in the cabin." That was close enough to yes. Henry brought out the bundle marked Leo, then Thomas. The last one was Marion. He carried it carefully because the cloth had come loose at one end and a pale piece of bone showed through. I wanted to tell him not to touch it there. I wanted to tell him I had it organized. But Henry already knew what he was doing. The rear doors shut. Snow brushed across the outside of the truck and made a soft scraping noise against the metal. Leon checked the latch twice. Then he sat back down. The radio crackled again.
Transport is being arranged.
the voice said.
Keep the survivor contained and warm.
Leon answered.
Copy.
I looked at him. Avery needs to come too. Leon didn't say anything. Gail's shoulder is bad. Tanner's leg still hurts. Douglas has frostbite. Oscar was keeping the food. They aren't in the truck, Leon said. They're at the cabin. They're not alive. I knew he was going to say that. He'd said it before. It didn't make it true. The truck started moving again. The heater blew warm air over my knees. Outside the windows, long dark rows of trees had snow packed around their trunks. The ridge was already disappearing behind us. I kept asking Leon whether they'd bring everyone, Avery, Gail, Oscar, Douglas, and Tanner, down before the next snowfall buried the tree line.